Sarah never liked mirrors. Even as a child, she avoided their gaze. So, when she inherited her great-aunt Eleanor's antique mirror, a chill ran down her spine. It was ornate with a silver frame tarnished with age. The glass itself seemed to breathe, its surface rippling like water. Despite her unease, Sarah hung the mirror in her bedroom. It was an heirloom after all, and Aunt Eleanor had loved it dearly. The first night with the mirror was the worst. Sleep wouldn't come. Sarah tossed and turned, the silence of her room broken only by the creaking of her old house. Each time she closed her eyes, she could feel the weight of the mirror's presence, like a pair of unseen eyes watching her. Finally, as the first rays of dawn pierced through her curtains, she drifted off, only to be jolted awake moments later by a cold shiver that ran down her spine. The feeling of being watched intensified. She knew, with unsettling certainty, that she was no longer alone. Days turned into weeks, and the feeling of unease lingered. The air in Sarah's bedroom felt heavy, and the scent of lavender, Aunt Eleanor's favorite, clung to the air. It was strongest near the mirror. Sarah noticed things out of place. A book turned face down, a chair slightly askew. At first, she dismissed them as tricks of her imagination, but as the incidents multiplied, doubt gave way to a creeping fear. One evening, while brushing her hair, Sarah paused, struck by a discrepancy in the mirror's reflection. The reflection moved, her hand lifting to touch the mirror's surface, while Sarah's own hand remained still, clutching the brush. A wave of dizziness washed over her, and she stumbled back from the mirror, her heart pounding in her chest. This was no trick of the light. The mirror was alive. The following night, Sarah awoke to a sound that sent chills down her spine. Tap, tap, tap. It was a faint sound, barely audible, but it seemed to come from the mirror. She sat up in bed, her gaze fixed on the dark, reflective surface. The tapping continued, rhythmic and persistent, like fingernails gently drumming against glass. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she noticed a figure in the mirror. It was her reflection, but it was different. It had a life of its own, its eyes open, staring back at her with an unnerving intensity. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she watched her reflection raise its hand, its fingers tapping against the surface of the mirror. A whisper, faint and chilling, seemed to emanate from the glass. "Help me," it breathed. Sarah's days became a blur of fear and anxiety. She couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched, of something sinister lurking just beyond her perception. The incidents with the mirror escalated. Objects moved more blatantly now, sometimes vanishing entirely, only to reappear in strange places. She heard whispers at night, faint voices calling her name, beckoning her closer to the mirror. Sleep offered no escape. She was plagued by nightmares, vivid and disturbing, always featuring the antique mirror. In these dreams, the mirror was a portal, a gateway to another realm, and she was being pulled towards it, powerless to resist. Desperate for answers, Sarah began researching the history of the mirror. She scoured antique books, dusty journals from her aunt's attic and the internet, hoping to find something, anything, that could explain the strange occurrences. Her search led her down a rabbit hole of local lore and forgotten tragedies. She discovered that her house and the land it stood upon had a long, dark history. One rainy afternoon, while sifting through her great-aunt's belongings, she stumbled upon an old diary, its pages brittle with age. The diary belonged to her great-great-grandmother, a woman named Elizabeth, who had lived in the house over a century ago. As Sarah delicately turned the pages, she felt a flicker of hope. Could this be the key to unlocking the mystery of the mirror? Elizabeth's diary was filled with mundane details of daily life, but as Sarah read further, a chilling narrative began to unfold. Elizabeth wrote of a beautiful, silver-framed mirror, a gift from her late husband, a sea captain who had traveled the world. She described the mirror as having a strange allure, but also a darkness that frightened her. She wrote of strange occurrences, objects moving on their own, whispers in the night, and terrifying encounters with her own reflection. One entry in particular sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. Elizabeth described waking in the dead of night to see a figure standing over her bed. It was a man, his face obscured by shadow, but his eyes burned with a cold, malevolent light. He reached for her, his hand outstretched, and then the entry abruptly ended. Sarah's heart pounded as she read the final entry in Elizabeth's diary. It was a name scrawled in a shaky hand, the ink smeared as if by tears. Captain James Blackwood. A quick search on the internet revealed a chilling tale. Captain Blackwood was a notorious privateer, rumored to have been involved in dark magic and piracy. He had vanished mysteriously at sea, his ship lost in a storm. Legend had it that he made a deal with a sea witch, trading his soul for power and wealth. Sarah's mind raced. Could this Captain Blackwood be the entity trapped within the mirror? Was he the one tormenting her just as he had tormented her great-great-grandmother? The more she uncovered about the mirror's past, the more she realized that it wasn't just an object, but a prison, a vessel containing a malevolent spirit desperate for release. One night, driven by a mix of fear and morbid curiosity, Sarah stood before the mirror. She stared into its depths, her heart pounding in her chest. The whispers started again, fainter this time, but unmistakable. They seemed to be calling her name, urging her closer. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she saw him. A face materialized in the mirror's depths. It was a man's face, weathered and worn, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to burn with a cold, ghostly fire. His lips moved, forming words she couldn't quite hear, but his eyes, those haunting blue eyes, held a look of desperate pleading that sent chills down her spine. He reached out, his hand pressed against the surface of the mirror, and Sarah swore she could feel its icy touch on her side. Sarah wanted to look away, to run, but something held her captive. The face in the mirror, Captain Blackwood, she realized, was no longer menacing. His expression was one of sorrow and regret. He mouthed a single word, his voice a low, mournful whisper that seemed to seep from the very depths of the mirror. Free. In that moment, Sarah's fear gave way to a strange sense of compassion. She saw in Captain Blackwood not a monster, but a trapped soul, desperate for release after centuries of imprisonment. He had been bound to the mirror, forced to witness countless reflections, but never to interact with the world beyond the glass. Driven by a sudden, inexplicable urge to help, Sarah reached out, her fingers touching the cold, smooth surface of the mirror. As her fingertips made contact, a jolt of energy surged through her body. She gasped, pulling back her hand, but it was too late. The mirror pulsed with a blinding light, and a force, powerful and irresistible, pulled her forward. She fell into the mirror, tumbling through a vortex of swirling colors and blinding light. Disoriented and terrified, Sarah thrashed against the unseen forces that held her captive. Then, as suddenly as it began, the journey ended. She landed hard on a cold, hard surface. The air knocked out of her lungs. As her vision cleared, she realized with growing horror that she was no longer in her bedroom. She was somewhere else, somewhere cold, dark, and utterly terrifying. Sarah was trapped, her reflection staring back at her from the other side of the glass. The room she was in was a mirror image of her own, but it was decayed, covered in dust and cobwebs. The air was stale and heavy, filled with the silence of a place long forgotten. She was a prisoner in her own reflection, her only company the haunting gaze of Captain Blackwood, whose spectral form now flickered beside her. He was free, but she was trapped, her fate bound to the haunted mirror. And in the depths of the mirror's glassy surface, she saw not her own terrified reflection, but the triumphant gleam in Captain Blackwood's eyes. A chilling reminder that some bargains once struck can never be undone.